hawkish RBNZ decision, 75. We were expecting 50, honestly. Statement is also outright hawkish. It was basically inflation warnings everywhere, warning of wage-led inflation. As you say, they raised their target rate to 5.5. We were expecting RBNZ to do a 50 and going up to stay around 4. Guess we have to go back to the drawing board. And I think, when we look at RBNZ, we tend to think of them as a leader, as a front runner in terms of central bank policy. So everybody is expecting central banks more or less to pivot, going forward. So this, hawkish surprise from the RBNZ and this so-called very, very dedicated focus on inflation will need to basically pay attention to subsequent meetings from the Fed and others going forward to see whether, central banks, are they really letting go of this inflation risk or are they going to basically turn the hit a little bit more? I think this is a very interesting development.
This is a very interesting development, but do you think that others would follow suit, especially what we can expect from the RBA next?
Well, I think for us, for the rest of the central banks, they have all sort of hinted that, they are comfortable in a sense to lift rates to, reasonable levels. For the RBA, we still see a 25, but, we just got to pay a bit more attention. And I think the big one is, of course, going forward, your job market and inflation indicators from the US, that will set the tone for the Fed and central bank expectations, for the rest of the year as we head into year end.
Yeah, and it's a really tricky situation, particularly for the RBNZ and RBA, because the housing market and the impact with debt and everything else. But I want to dive in a little bit more on that. But just before I get to that, do you see any potential risk when it comes to the Brazilian real and just Brazil in general, because Bolsonaro announced that he is going to challenge the election, because that could set up some political turmoil, and then how the Brazilian currency fares against the rest of the basket could be, there could be a little bit of fluctuation going on.
Well, I think for most currencies, after the experience we had with the sterling pound and the so-called the Liz Truss debacle, to use a much more polite word, when it comes to political risk, the question is whoever takes charge, they need to practice very responsible, fiscal discipline. So whoever's in charge, any new government that comes along, if they start to, have any whiff of, fiscal looseness or irresponsibility, the currency will be sold off very quickly by financial markets. I think that point is now made very clearly, and I suspect it will be clear, to whoever's going to push forth in Brazil as well.